Good morning, church. Glad to be back in the book of Mark with you this morning. Today's passage is Mark chapter 3. It says, "And he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, 'Come here.' And he said to him, 'Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill?' But they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, 'Stretch out your hand.' And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. And the Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the sea, and a great crowd followed from Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem and Idumea, and from beyond the Jordan and from around Tyre and Sidon. When the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him. And he told his disciples to have a boat ready for him, because of the crowd, lest they crush him. For he had healed many, so that all who had diseases pressed around him to touch him. And whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, 'You are the Son of God.' And he strictly ordered them not to make him known. And he went up on the mountain and called to him those whom he desired. And they came to him. And he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so that they might be with him, and he might send them out to preach and have authority to cast out demons. He appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James the son of Zebedee, and John the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder, Andrew and Philip and Bartholomew and Matthew and Thomas and James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus and Simon the Zealot and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Then he went home, and the crowd gathered again, so that they could not even eat. And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying, 'He is out of his mind.' And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem were saying, 'He's possessed by Beelzebul, and by the prince of demons he casts out the demons.' And he called them to him and said to them in parables, 'How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but is coming to an end. But no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man, and then indeed he may plunder his house. Truly I say to you, all sins will be forgiven the children of man, and whatever blasphemies they utter, but whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit never has forgiveness, but is guilty of an eternal sin, for they were saying, 'He has an unclean spirit.' His mother and his brothers came, and standing outside they sent to him and called him. And a crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, 'Your mother and your brothers are outside seeking you.' And he answered them, 'Who are my mother and my brothers?' And looking about at those who sat around him, he said, 'Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother.'" I was reading this morning, and we're sort of getting into the body of Mark, where a lot of things happen, and it's hard to know how exactly a particular chapter holds together. But in the story overall, I'm struck at this point that Jesus started out very popular. You know, people were flocking to him, and they all wanted to have him heal them, have him teach them. They were amazed at his teaching with authority. But then in this chapter, his own family says he's out of his mind. The scribes say he's possessed by Beelzebul. He's just facing a lot of opposition, and in some sense, things are not going at least how his apostles expected them to. But in the middle of that frustration, Jesus does not close himself off with bitterness. It strikes me that at the end of this chapter, he says, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother." You know, as people are hard on Jesus, his response is not to say, "Fine, I don't need you anyway." It's not to close himself off, but rather to open himself up, to focus himself on doing the will of God, and to say, "I'm open to anybody else who would, also being my brother, my sister, my mother." And I think that's relevant for us in a situation where many of our plans may be frustrated, in a situation where many of the things we were counting on are suddenly fragile or on pause, to say, rather than closing myself off with bitterness, that I want to be like Jesus, to say, "Whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother," and to be watching out for one another, brothers and sisters. I want to encourage you again today, please be praying. Please be praying for our church, please be praying for our world.